Okay, and so a little bit about modes here. I have a image here to put up. I guess I'll just do it at the end. So with these modes now, I was talking with Josh Talby recently, and he mentioned about not really having memorized the sound of the different modes yet, and how you go about doing that. And I'm really kind of glad that he brought that up, because just memorizing the sound is just a very, very big part of it, obviously, especially if these videos I do are improvisation based, and so you need to know what stuff is going to sound like, ideally as much as possible before you even play it. Which sounds like a daunting task, and it really is, but it's just something that you build up to slowly. But with the modes now, the problem that I think most people are probably going to have in terms of not really being able to easily memorize the sound of them is that when you just play the modes as they are, they sound very, very unremarkable. And just a quick refresher on what the modes are. So the modes are just taking your major scale, and for stuff like this, I always talk. Oh, hey Josh, I was just talking about you. So basically, with the modes, what they are is you take a major scale, and then you just basically you're doing inversions of a major scale, and that's really all there is to it. Just take your major scale, then you start on a different note than you normally would, and you end on a different note. And I always talk about this in terms of C, like C major, because in C major there's no sharps, there's no flats. It's the easiest thing to deal with. So a C major scale is just C, D, E, F, G, A, B, right? So if you, instead of going from C to C, you go from D to D. And that's your D Dorian mode. All you did is take the same notes from the same scale and just play them in the same order. And I just started and ended one note different from what I did the first time. And so, Josh, what I was saying is that the hard part about learning the sound of the modes is memorizing the sound of them. And what I think causes people a lot of trouble is that they sound very unremarkable when you just play the modes themselves. They don't sound like anything, really. They sound really no more interesting than a major scale. And that's where I think that the problem lies. So if you just use your major scale again, just C major. I mean, it sounds fine. I mean, it sounds great. I mean, that scale is the basis of everything. But it doesn't sound that interesting. D Dorian doesn't really sound like much either. Like if you did E Phrygian, F Lydian, G Mixolydian, A Aeolian, or natural minor, B Locrian, back to C major. They all sound good in their own right, but yeah, it does. The notes in Dorian use all the notes from just regular pentatonic, and what we do in that case, because just because the scale by itself just doesn't sound like anything, if you just play a a C major chord, for example, just like kind of play over a C major chord, and then you can just kind of do scale runs, just C major, D Dorian, E Phrygian. You know, you can play all of those modes, and you can hit all the notes, and I mean, it'll sound fine, but it's not going to be interesting. It's not going to help you really develop the sound, an ear for what they actually sound like. So here's what I would recommend doing about this, and I think this is a good starting point, because it's what you were kind of asking about, Josh, and it also is something that I can talk about without having my video go, you know, a millennium in length. So basically, what I would suggest you start with is looking at the scale, and you look at the notes within it, the intervals that give it the sound that it has. You know, what makes it different from a major scale, and one of the most kind of prominent sounding intervals in there. And intervals are huge. I mean, intervals are everything, really, what it comes down to. I have a diagram that I'm going to put up at the end of the video, just about D Dorian, kind of like in the first 12 frets. But knowing certain intervals, you know, knowing like what were C to E, or, you know, like C to E, I'm sorry, D to E like that, or you have like a D to E like that, or you can go D to E like that, you know, D to E like that, or you can go from like a D to an A like that, or D to A like that, D to A like that. Just knowing all the intervals, that's going to be huge too. So you don't have to just learn what these characteristic notes sound like in kind of just like comparing one to the other. You know, you can learn them all over the place. Now Dorian, if you look at the scale degrees that are in Dorian, here's what we have. We have 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, major 6, flat 7, back up to 1. Okay. Now we gotta find the really crucial notes within that. So here's a couple of the intervals that are most important. And not just intervals, but maybe I can do like groups of 3 as well. Yeah, I got you covered, Josh. So here's what we're going to look at. A couple of examples. So you already mentioned that pentatonic, like minor pentatonic, does exist within Dorian, which it does. There's a 1, there's a flat 3, there's a 4, there's a 5, and there's the flat 7. The notes that aren't in there are the 2 and the major 6. Now that doesn't mean that they're not important, but they just don't happen to fall naturally with pentatonic like that. So here's what we're going to do. Let's go to our D, okay? So here is the first one, having like a our 1, our flat 3, because Dorian is a minor scale, it has a flat 3, and our major 6. Now, in that position, I'm doing the 1 there, and the flat 3 is the highest note, and the lowest of the 3 notes is the 6th. Now, what if we wanted to do that in a slightly different position? Well, we can do something like let's put the D as the highest note here. So here's our 1, and there's our 6, and our flat 3 is here. You can do it here also, though, but that one feels a little bit strange. Let's try doing, what about having the D as the lowest note? We have D, and then we have we'll do our major 6 here, which is the B. And then we'll do our minor 3rd there. So we have, or if you want to change the position a little bit. Or it's a little bit confusing, but that's why we're only taking a couple of notes at a time. So basically, let's look at it this way. You take something just like your minor pentatonic, okay? That has just it has a sound that you're really used to, you know, just you hear it all the time and you play it a lot. You know, I play it a lot. Lots of people play it a lot. But it's the most important thing. And when I put the interval chart up, or like the diagram, that'll make this a lot easier too, because you'll be able to see it. Let me see if I may be able to do that real quick. Just a second here. Okay. Where do we go? All right, I'll get it up there. But starting with just the 1, flat 3, and 5. Say we did like a 1, a flat 3, and a perfect 5th right there. Okay. So if I'm playing in A flat, how do you remember where is Locrian? That is that's just memorizing 2 things: 1, your major scale, and just 2, knowing the order that the modes go in. Like going back to just sticking with D. So like you mentioned Locrian here. So I know that in the key of C, which is what we're playing everything around here, Locrian and the key of C is the 7th mode, and it's going to start on B. So if I know that if I'm playing in D Dorian, that means that I'm also playing in C major, because like D Dorian is the 2nd mode of C major, and if I'm playing in C major, that means I know I'm also playing in B Locrian. So that's really all that there is to that. But go back to the intervals now. Now, like if we did like the 1, the flat 3, and a 5 in D, you know, that's just like a normal minor triad, okay? It's unremarkable, and that could be any number of different things. That could be minor pentatonic. That could be like Phrygian. That could be harmonic minor. That could be any number of altered scales. That could be like a Dorian sharp 4. One, flat 3, and 5 could be a lot of different things. But what we're doing is basically we're kind of isolating the interval groups that are less frequently seen throughout different scales, and this is one of them. Even the like doing like a 1, the flat 3, the 5, and like the flat 7. That could be a lot of things too. But you add in that major 6 instead, and then you start to get something that sounds more interesting, more you know, kind of more unique, I guess. Maybe that's not a good term, because I mean something can only be one type of unique, and that's unique, but it's less common. So I'm doing a D here, and then I'm doing the flat 3 there, and I'm doing the flat 6, or I'm sorry, the 6 there. Yeah, probably partially the order of the notes, but just knowing which notes that you could take to put in a certain order in the first place. This does not sound like Dorian, for example. I was just doing like D minor, most of a D minor pentatonic there, and it doesn't sound Dorian. It doesn't have the Dorian sound, even though those notes exist in a Dorian scale. But if you start to add in that one there, which is I'm doing the B, then stuff gets interesting. Or you play it in this position. That could be anything. I'm doing like the 5 flat 7, 1 flat 3 there, just pentatonic with just one of the notes not being played. But you start hitting that major 6th. you start getting something that sounds interesting. And that's where the Dorian sound really kind of starts to come in. Clapton, yeah, he probably does a lot of that. A lot of the kind of like the blues-based guys from back then, and I guess even today they do a lot of that. There's good examples of songs that use a lot of Dorian that I can point you toward. They may not necessarily be in the key of D minor, but that's okay, because the important thing is getting the sound of these intervals within the scale and not what key it's in to begin with. So that was kind of focusing on the 1, the flat 3, and the 6. Sorry, the major 6 like that. And then you could start, once you really get that in there, because that's one of the big ones. Another one, let's look at this now. I'm going to go back to D here. Now, D Dorian also uses there's a major second in there too. And major second you don't really hear as much in blues because it's not in pentatonic, basically. I'm not saying that blues has to have everything pentatonic, but it's just not one that you hear as often. So you can add in that too, but you may want to use it in addition to some of the other notes that do give it the Dorian sound, that being the flat 3. So like the perfect 5th, that's an important one too, but the 6 in there, the major 6. So it has less of the sound in there, but it can add a little bit of color to it, because you don't want to go from kind of one kind of a problematic technique, or not technique, but problem being getting stuck within a couple of notes only, you know, like pentatonic, for example. I'm not saying that you do that. I know you don't do that, but you don't want to go from playing 1, 3, or 4 note sequence that you can't break out of to learning a new one, but then playing just that and nothing else. But for Dorian now, just because we're starting with Dorian, that's the most important part of it. Is you have that minor triad in there, and you have the major 6 in there. Now we still have the flat 7 in there, which is still a very, very important note. But you can also you can use the two together. Or a lot of times you can just kind of replace the minor 7 with the 6, and that gives it more of a Dorian sound. And you get that tritone sort of a thing in an interesting spot there, which is the interval of that sharp 4. You get something like this if you play like this little bluesy dyad, sort of a cliche like. What you're doing there is you're playing I'm just playing like that's the perfect 5th, and that's the 1 right there. I'm doing the 6th, I'm doing the flat 3 on top of that. Wow, I'm out of tune. Yes, Josh, D Dorian is a C major. Yeah, you play it and you don't realize that you're playing it. Again, because if it winds up coming off as sounding like scale runs, then it just doesn't sound like anything that really sticks out to you. It sounds like kind of like boring, just plain old C major kind of stuff, or slight modifications to like a minor pentatonic or a natural minor, which it really is. It's only Dorian's only 1 note removed from a natural minor. But yeah, you probably do use that sort of thing all the time, and you just didn't realize that's what you're doing. Those are the important notes right there. Those are the most important. And I mean, the perfect fifth is going to be very important in there too, but just for the purposes of highlighting the differences between like Dorian and major or pentatonic or anything like that, it's not as important to talk about the perfect fifth. You're going to be doing that all the time anyway because it's the it's the dominant tone, you know. It has the dominant resolution. So you're never going to stop playing that. But knowing that the other notes in there, knowing that those are kind of where the sound comes from in this case. So, hey Scott. Yeah, it's very Johnny B. Good like. That's in what key is that? And that's in B flat though. You know, something like that. But let's see. Let's find other ways to look at those intervals, and you know, other things that you can do with them. I would suggest that we take a look at this next. I went right by Guitar Center earlier today, didn't stop for new strings because I'm an idiot and I forgot. I'm going to go down to, I'm just going to go down to this D here. Now, let's look at this now. Let's add in our, still focused on the 1 and the flat 3 and the major 6 there. Now, let's add in the major third as kind of like a passing tone. And if you do that, then you start, that really kind of adds a new element to it because then you can start abusing that as well. And you can start doing stuff like, just weird stuff like that. Nothing there was really remarkable sounding. That's all right though. It's just a demonstration, really. You can look at smaller groupings within something like this. Take another really common, easy, cliche pattern that sounds really good, and that would be this one that you hear in major a lot. Like, yeah, I've heard that so many times. Now, look at what that's doing now. We still have our D, and we have our perfect fifth there, and we have our major 6 there. So, but with that, because of that major 6, and because there's no other notes in there clashing, we can do that with Dorian as well. So if you're playing over like a D minor, and you're playing Dorian, it works there because I mean the notes just are they just line up exactly, and you can something else you can do just to further highlight this way too you just take that major 6 there, replace that with your 7th. You know, I mean, how many times have we played that one? Or just for here, I'm going to do it this way to keep the patterns very close. Then you put those together. And you're going in between something that is very much minor and something that is very much major. And right there, you just heard there, those sounded really, really good together. And that's one good way, I think, to describe Dorian is something that sounds minor, but it doesn't sound too minor. And then you can start adding in some of the other stuff along with it. You can start throwing that minor 3rd in there. You can do like a get into like some funk chord sort of a thing there. And that's all that was. I just played I had the flat 3 and the flat 7 there. And then I replaced the flat 7 with that major 6. Kind of taking it down a little bit in that sort of a pentatonic box pattern sort of thing. Now, what I did there is I kind of started going and playing kind of around the middle section of that sort of a box pattern. And I started highlighting the change in notes there that we've been talking about. So at first I played this. So it's kind of like doing the, like there's the flat 7 there. That's a G, which is our perfect 4th. Into that, which is, you know, just kind of like the D minor, sort of it's like an implied D minor, even though we're really only doing a dyad there, 2 notes. But we did that, and then I did that. Now take this and then do the same sort of an idea here, when you take that flat 7 and you replace that with your major 6. Still just staying within Dorian though. And if you want to kind of give yourself a little bit more of a contrast, throw in something that's very much not Dorian, which would be like kind of, instead of playing your major 6, doing your minor 6 and then your flat 6, and hearing something that sounds very minor. And you can hear how far away you are from natural minor, but at the same time you're so close, you're only 1 note removed. But stuff like that, if you throw that in there, that's not necessarily a attempt to kind of spice up with what I'm doing with something a little bit different by adding in a little natural minor along with it. That wasn't the point of doing that. That was just to show you how big of a contrast it is, especially with this. I mean, we're playing so much of just Dorian. It can be easy to kind of really get too used to that sound, if that makes sense, because you're going to want to memorize the sound, but I mean, you gotta remember what it is that is different about what you're playing right now with this Dorian stuff and versus what you've been playing, which is the stuff that does not stick out enough for you to really get a chance to focus on it and see what gives it its kind of characteristic tones. Now let's do this. Now I'm going to add a passing tone in here, and this is actually going to include that flat 6 that I was just talking about. But with Dorian, I find that if you go from the flat 6 up, resolve it up to the major 6, it keeps more of the Dorian sound, which isn't terribly minor. Whereas if you're going from the flat 6 down to a 5, then that wants to resolve back up to your D there, and that sounds very minor. But let's do this then. So I'm going to do the flat 6, so I'm going to take that up to the major 6 there. There's a little bit of terrible garbage in there, but it sounds really cool. Because we're doing the same thing that we started with, which was focusing on those very important notes, the most important notes that are responsible for giving Dorian the Dorian sound, which is, it's not the 1, it's not the 5, it's really the major 6 is the most important one. And the major 6 in conjunction with the flat 3. I would say the flat 3 is the second most important of those two. And then behind that is your 5th and whatever else. But I definitely say that for giving a moded sound, in this case, it is the flats, or the major 6 and the flat 3, most importantly, then just adding that in with the perfect 5th and stuff like that you already have. Now, just also kind of getting used to going more at the intervallic sort of the intervallic sort of aspect of this sort of thing, knowing that you can do your 1, 6, flat 3, knowing you can do it there, or might be like a what else could we do on 1 string like that? Versus I know my guitar is very out of tune. You might be able to do that too. I'll say it one more time, that once I put the diagram up, that'll make that a lot easier. But just knowing that within those different positions, that where you can do stuff like this. You know, you do that there. If you do want to do it here, then you have, or where would it be? So that's the F and the B. Okay. So we have a B here. We have another F. That's the same sort of a thing, but in that case, what I did is I had the B on the top and the F underneath. Whereas over here, I had the B on the bottom and I had the F on top. So there's little just inversions in there that you can keep track of too. But I guess the most important thing is just memorizing those couple of notes in there within the scale degrees or the intervals that make Dorian different in sound from the other modes, basically. And each mode is going to have something like that. Just like your Ionian mode, you know, like major, C major. You know, we have like our for C majors, it's largely the triad. Now, other than that, I mean, the major 6 in C major it's important, you know, it is, but it's not as important, I would say, in cementing something in the sound of C major as like the major 7. And that might just be personal preference for me too. But say we go on to like Phrygian, which I guess I'll probably wind up talking about next. I'll probably do another one on Dorian though, just so I don't go for, you know, hours and hours and hours. I'm going to wrap this one up. But like Phrygian is going to have like a, you know, you're going to have like our flat 2 and our flat 3 in there. With probably with the 5th, or maybe it's going to be the flat 7 in Phrygian that makes it really gives it the Phrygian sound too. Like Lydian, like F Lydian. Very, very much. It's going to be it's going to have the major 3rd, and the strongest note in there is going to be the sharp 4. But just so you see that each mode group is going to have some intervals in there that really give a well-defined sound. So I'll talk more about this one, but just that would be my first step for this mode, and anything else is just playing around with the flat 3 and the 6, and then start putting in the other notes in there too. And the good news is that, as you said, this is something that you've probably done a lot, and it's going to come to you really quickly. But just do that and just really try to memorize the sound of what it is that you're doing, and then just go from there.